Hi, it's Llarold, and I'm going to talk about how to tank Halls of Infusion. But first, don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, before we jump in, this is the route and approach I use with pugs to make things easier for uncoordinated groups in which I expect some people to make mistakes along the way. This isn't necessarily the most optimal route for an organized group, but this isn't the MDI either. This is like weekly push, weekly completion, maybe like pushing for people for whom a 12 is like a high key. Again, it's really about making things easy for everyone in the group. I used to say that this was 4 keys from like 2 to 25. Now I would say about 2 to 12, 2 to 13 in the current state of the Season 4 key redesign. You can also use this for Mythic Zeros. Maybe you can sidestep some stuff along the way, but that also would work. Ultimately, if your group is good and well organized, you know each other, you have some trust in people, you can get a lot more aggressive with pulls, and you definitely should. But if you're just playing with strangers or, kind of reaching your limit, just play things safe, and that really is what this route is all about. Okay, let's now get into it. And I'll start by talking about just basic Bloodlust timings. When should you do the first Bloodlust? I really think you should do it in the first pull, and I actually have the MDT already pulled up here. If you trust your group, and if you maybe have somebody in the group like a hunter who can help you pull, you can actually change this first pull slightly. And instead of just doing the 4 guys on the right here and the 2 guys at the top of the stairs, you can bring in the 2 guys at the bottom of the stairs. They're a little bit out of range. I mean, they're quite a long ways away. The distance from the top of the stairs to the bottom of the stairs is actually pretty long. But again, if you have somebody who you can trust to pull it, or if you're just like on a paladin, something that can pull from a long range, you can pull all that in together and burn it all down with Bloodlust. And that really, really works very well. And then that makes the next pull a little bit easier because that pull can be a bit dangerous, if people don't have all their cooldowns up. Otherwise, I kind of just do the first room and then proceed from there. As for the next set of lusts, when you would time Bloodlust, you can do it on the second boss. It won't be up for the first boss, and that's fine. First boss isn't really that big of a deal in terms of difficulty or needing a lust for him. The second boss isn't really all that dangerous either, but it's nice to lust bosses. You can just use it on this double elite pull here, Flamecaller Amy and Flame Squallbringer Cyrus. That's okay if you are on a fortified week. I think that can be pretty good. But on tyrannical week, Gulping Goliath can actually do a good bit of damage and just be very annoying to fight. So having lust to make that fight faster is good. Really, it's more about getting it on cooldown again so you can use it on the final boss. And that is really where you want to be. You want to use it on the final boss? If it's not up for the final boss, you're like zooming through the dungeon, you're making good time. That is actually a good problem to have. Real suffering from success type of vibe. All right, now let's take a look at the MDT route that I use, and here it is. I have it pulled up, and I just kind of want to emphasize some of the bigger pulls, some of the double pulls along the way. So as I said, I like to start with this more basic first pull. I do like to lust the first pull. It would make more sense to kind of drag in these 2 guys at the bottom of the stairs. Usually the reason I don't is I just want to make sure I have threat actually established. Some of these guys, the Primalist Ravagers, like to jump around, I believe. Maybe it's the Geomancers. Yeah, it's these guys. They like to leap around, and they can just be very annoying to deal with. They're not really like that dangerous as long as you step out of it, but that can be kind of irritating. The bigger issue, the bigger danger in this area is these containment apparati. They have 2 spells. One is an actual interruptible spell, Expulse, that does need to be interrupted. It will do group wiping damage if you don't kick it. That is vitally important, so you really never want to pull more than 2 of these at a time, and there basically is one in every pull. There's one in this first pull, one at the bottom of the stairs, one in the next pull, one in the next pull, one in this side pull, one in this, or 2 in this pull, 2 in this, like they're all over the place, and you really, really, really need to lock down those interrupts on the Expulse. But also, they will spam cast Containment Beam, which is not interruptible, and so it does a lot of damage. It was nerfed pretty substantially in Season 4. I'm looking at the patch notes here. It was nerfed by 42%. That's a big nerf. It was way overpowered before. It's still kind of dangerous in conjunction with some of the other mechanics going on in these pulls. It can kill people, and so when they start channeling on somebody that's kind of lower health, you want to stun these guys or CC them in some way. Paralysis, Blinding Light, that kind of Sigil of Misery, that kind of thing. So those guys are kind of annoying, and those are sort of the main danger of all of these pulls, and you just kind of want to clip through and take it 1 pull at a time, especially if you're doing that very large pull at the start. But if you're not, if you're kind of just grabbing these guys at the bottom of the stairs and pulling them into the next pull, that's also fine. One super important note here, and I will say this pull right here, after you've crossed through the staircase and the little bit of water, this is just a very tough pull. There's just a lot of guys in this pull. There's also another annoying interruptible spell in here that all of the Refty defenders cast, and that's Demoralizing Shout, which will reduce everybody's damage by 25% for a long time. So there are multiple interrupts that need to be dealt with, and that's really why you don't want to be pulling these containment apparatuses more than 2 at a time at most. Is you're going to have a very important interrupt from each of those guys, and also an important interrupt from the defenders. You can stun the defenders to cancel that cast, like that also works, but then that means you're not using it to maybe not using it to get rid of the containment beams. This pull over here is only worth doing if you have an engineer in the group. There's a little console underneath these guys that you can click, and it will give everybody in the group a spell like Limited Immortality, something like that, and it basically just prevents 1 death for everyone in the group. So I think it's worth the extra pull. You know, this pull is kind of annoying. It's 3 Refty defenders and a containment apparatus. You probably are going to get hit by a Demoralizing Shouts at some point along the way. And more importantly, you can see from the percentage, you don't actually need it. You got 100% without these guys, but I'm an engineer on all my characters, so I like to do this pull just simply to get that party-wide cheat death buff. But if you're not, if you don't have one in the group, don't bother. Really, you don't need it. It just is nice to have, you know, on random situations where somebody's going to take some damage and maybe die, to like cover that up for them. Again, the next pull, it has a defender and 2 containment apparatuses, and then 2 geomancers that are going to be leaping around. So you just want to be dodging and interrupting and interrupting and interrupting. That's kind of all there is to that. And then the final pull really is the worst, I think. You know, it's not the worst in terms of danger. I do feel like these ones that have 2 containment apparatus in them are more dangerous. This one right here, before you go into the water, very small little stream, and then this last one before you go out and onto the balcony are maybe the worst in terms of like the fact that you have to dodge. But this is 2 containment apparatus and 3 defenders, so there's just no way that you're not going to get some Demoralizing Shouts happening unless you're on a Demon Hunter and you have 2 Sigils of Silence and you have a really huge amount of burst damage from the group to deal with it. Or maybe you're on a Prot Pal and you have Divine Toll up and you get really good Grand Crusader resets and you're able to interrupt all of that. In any case, you deal with that, then you fight the first boss, you kick him down, beat him up, jump across the bridge, or jump across this little water here. And if you're on a warrior, you can just straight heroic leap across. Evokers can like double jump and glide across, or, you know, Demon Hunters can leap across. Like, there's a lot of classes that can just get across this easily without having to swim, but whatever. You come up the stairs and you do this pull, and I like to do this as a double pull. Each of these shock troopers are casters, so they will try to stand still and just cast from range. So you need to have some sort of coordinated interrupt. That could be Sigil of Silence. Most people are still playing Demon Hunter at the moment, so, you know, Sigil of Silence will work. Avenger Shield will work. Just actual interrupts from people in your group will work. But you want to bring those guys down here because there will be a Skulking Zealot. There's also a Skulking Zealot up there, a Stealthy Boy, and he will cheap shot you if you don't hit him first. So you kind of want to throw some sort of AoE skill onto these guys before he's able to cheap shot and stun you, and then have mayhem happening where people are getting auto attacked while you're not able to do anything. And that's sort of the whole theme of this little hallway here, is that you want to tap the guys, the Skulking Zealots, before they're able to stun you and then go buck wild on your group. So Avenger Shield will break them out, Sigil of Flame will break them out, Death and Decay will break them out. Most of the classes have some way of breaking them out. Keg Smash on one of these guys will break them out. Like, lots and lots of stuff that you can do to break them out. I think Warriors may be the only class that's in a bit of a tough spot, but a Thunderclap, if you're in range, will break them out before they get you. Then you really want to deal with the Swoglets, and that's sort of the other mechanic of this side, is the Swoglets will just spam, basically they fixate on everybody, and they will just spam attack with this Gulp Swag Toxin with every auto attack, and it doesn't really do that much damage, but if it hits 10 stacks, it's an instant kill. If you're on a class, Monk, Pally, Druid, that can remove poison, you should do that as soon as you see anybody get above like 3, so like 4 stacks or more. I'm already dispelling so that I can have it up in case somebody does manage to get to 8 or 10. People should just be kiting. You should be helping slow and stun these little guys. They don't really have that much health. They're really not all that dangerous other than the instant kill. but you do want to deal with that. Then you come into the next hallway here, and I just like to do the dazzling dragonflies on their own. They have this one spell, Dazzle. They just do a frontal cone. It is interruptible, so you can interrupt it, or you can just sidestep it. Either way works fine. Point is, you just want to face them away from the group, and then either sidestep or interrupt their Dazzle, and then that's kind of all they really do. They just auto attack. You want to be sure that nobody runs forward and gets this patrol of 2 Skulking Zealots. If they do, be sure to tag the Skulking Zealots. You know, it's not the end of the world if like the Hunter or the Warlock gets stunned and they lose a bit of damage, and then you're able to pick these guys up and they're not killing anybody. That's okay. It happens, right? Sometimes Hunters do stuff. Motto for the entire history of WoW: sometimes Hunters do stuff, and sometimes the stuff they do gets them killed, and that's okay. Everybody will be fine. You just pick these guys up, and then I like to, if they get pulled while we're doing the dragonflies, then I'll just pull them together and kill them here. If I'm able to pull them on my own, nobody walks forward and pulls them accidentally, then I will grab them and pull them down the hall into 2 more dragonflies, and then just a ton of swoglets will spawn from the ceiling. And you deal with those the same way. It's a very hectic pull. You're just sort of running around a lot, or I should say everyone else is running around a lot. You're helping kite or slow and stun and help them kite and dispel if you're able to. And more importantly, you're facing the dragonflies and away from the group, kind of toward this wall here, one of the walls, and CC them as needed, interrupt them as needed. Then the next pull is like the first pull that's actually kind of a real pull in this area. Everything else feels very like kind of weird and fixatey and janky. This next one has 2 Skulking Zealots kind of in front. They sort of form like an M pattern facing you, and so you just really want to be sure that you tag both of the Skulking Zealots so that they don't get the chance to stun you. And then you basically just kind of spam interrupts on the Primalist Shock Troopers. They will try to cast Infused Lightning, Elemental Focus. Elemental Focus is their big thing that will make their Lightning Bolt deal a lot more damage, and you just don't want to let them cast Elemental Focus. Just lock that down the whole time. Then you're done with that pull, and you move on to this one, Flamecaller Amy and Squallbringer Cyrus. And this is sort of a slow pull. They have a lot of health. I don't really think they're all that dangerous. Flamecaller Amy has Pyretic Burst that you want to interrupt. She will cast that over and over again. She also casts Cauterize, and you just kind of want to deal with that as well. I think that's interruptible as well. Pretty much all there is to it on her front is just interrupting her. Cyrus, on the other hand, will blink around and spawn guys all around, and so you do want to pick those guys up as they spawn, and they kind of spawn one at a time, so they can be a little bit annoying to pick up on like a warrior. They're pretty easy to pick up on a monk. You know, monk has Rushing Jade Wind and Spinning Crane Kick. It's pretty easy to maintain like sustained AoE threat on a monk. On a Blood Decay, it's okay. You have Death and Decay down. Paladin has Consecrate, but like Demon Hunter and Warrior can be a little bit annoying to pick these little dudes up that are being spawned by the Zephyr's Call. But ultimately, you pick them up, you AoE them down, you drag them onto the bosses. And that's really all that there is to it. You just kind of want to focus Amy down so that you're not allowing her to heal. You're not allowing her to spam cast onto people. Focus her down and then kill off Cyrus afterward. Then you have this weird break in the map where the wall just sort of ends, and then it actually comes in over here. There's this little staircase. Run and jump over the ledge, go kill the Gulping Goliath, get gulped. And then you proceed into what is, I think, by far the most dangerous, difficult area of the dungeon for the tank. You have this one Glacial Proto-Dragon on his own. Usually as you finish the boss, you'll have this patrol here of an Ice Caller and an Earthshaker that have patrolled up right onto him. I like to pull all 3 of those together, and I face them toward the wall because the Glacial Proto-Dragon will cast Oceanic Breath over and over again, and it does a lot of damage, and it's a frontal cone, and there's not anything you can do about it. You just have to tank it. So use stuff like Spell Block, Anti-Magic Shell, major defensive cooldowns to deal with the Oceanic Breath. Somewhat in this pull, but really more in the next pull is where that really matters, because the next pull is much more dangerous. The next pull consists of basically the same pull that we just did, these 2 guys and a dragon, but also a patrol of 2 more guys and then 2 other different guys. And so in this whole area, what you really want to be doing is you want to be facing away. You want to be locking in, like literally focusing the Ice Callers and focus interrupting their Refreshing Tides cast. That is vitally important. They will heal for a ton and make this last substantially longer if you don't interrupt all of their Refreshing Tides cast, so that's super important. You can do anything to interrupt it. It doesn't have to just be literal interrupts. It can be fears, stuns, paralysis, death grip to cancel the cast. Like anything like that will work, but it is super important that those casts are stopped in some way. And then other than that, you just want to keep the deep chill, or no, I'm sorry, the oceanic breath faced away. So like for this one, I like to, I'll just freehand draw it. I like to kind of stand so that he's facing toward the wall there. And then for this next pull, I like to do basically the same thing, face him toward the wall here. And that really helps with making sure that nobody gets cleaved by the breath. Now for the final pull, there's not really as close of a wall. Maybe you could drag him up here to this side wall, but I prefer to just face him into the room. And it's the same exact situation as the previous pull, except 2 fewer guys. You don't have these 2 guys in the pull. You do have Earthshakers in all of these pulls as well, and they can be pretty annoying. I think that's the only mechanic I haven't really mentioned. Basically, they'll cast this spell, Rumbling Earth, and then it puts a circle in the ground, and then after several seconds, there's like quite a bit of a delay. It will do a massive amount of spell damage, and also, more importantly, a really, really nasty long stun. I think it's 4 or 5 seconds. It's not listed here on the tooltip, but it's a long time, and that's an eternity when you're tanking. So pretty easy to deal with. When they cast that Rumbling Earth, you step out of it, and then it literally does nothing, but you do want to make sure that you backpedal away or step slightly to the side so that you are both out of that and also not pointing the oceanic breath at anybody in the group. And that's pretty much all there is to this section here before the third boss. You fight the third boss, you deal with her, and then you move on to the gauntlet, and the gauntlet is not the most dangerous part, but it is the most annoying. All right, so the first pull in the gauntlet here is probably the most like wonky one. There's a weird little mechanic, and I'll just kind of mark here. There are basically 2 gold and yellow pylons on either side of the hallway here, and they're sort of like the reset marker. Anything that's on the boss side of that yellow pylon, so basically just not this first 3 Angry Age Aqua Rager mobs that you grab and pull into the next pull, but all the rest of these guys, if you try to pull them past those pylons, they will immediately evade bug and reset. So the first pull is right up on them. They're like right here, and you just basically have to tank this like pretty tight up in here. I kind of forgot the last time I was in here, and I did pull it back, and then in looking at footage, it's very clear that like, oh yeah, I'm walking back there and they immediately reset. Right. So you want to be kind of squirrely about not pulling the Glacial Proto-Dragon, but also not pulling these guys back so that they reset. And then, you know, once you've dealt with that, it's pretty much smooth sailing the rest of the way. You're not trying to pull these guys all the way back to the entrance. Like, there's no need to do that. But just this first pull can be a little squirrely because of that one annoying mechanic. Maybe those lights, maybe that reset line should be a bit further up, but you know, it is what it is. Throughout the gauntlet, the little aqua guys will be spawning and running down. You just pick those up throughout the gauntlet. It can be a little annoying if you're on, you know, a warrior, a demon hunter, something that doesn't have like spam constant ticks of threat like rushing Jadewind or whatever. But it's not the end of the world. These guys really aren't very dangerous. You mainly just want to focus on dealing with these pulls exactly the same way that you did in the previous area. You want to not get hit by the waves. That's super important. You want to not fall off the platform. That's super important. You'll get put all the way at the back. And things will probably evade bug if you get knocked off as a tank, or they will destroy your group, potentially. And other than that, step out of the Rumbling Earths, face the Oceanic Breath. I do like to face that to the side. I'll draw the little marking here, face that to the side so it's not hitting anybody. And other than that, you pretty much just make your way through the gauntlet until you get to Infuser Soraya. And she doesn't really have a lot of mechanics. She has Inundate, where she'll just do some damage to people. She has Aqueous Barrier, where she will give herself a huge shield, and you do need to interrupt that. That is super important. And then her other mechanic is Flash Flood. She does a big knockback that will knock you off the platform, so you just want to step out of that every time. In the past, I usually pull her back a little bit. There'll be like a little hump here in the middle. I can't really get it to draw like that. And so usually I will pull her into this sort of area, like behind the one little hump that's there. And then that gives people a bit more time to react to the waves up front. You can just sidestep as needed to deal with the waves and not be fighting with this hump that's kind of in the way. That's sort of the approach I like to do. I think in the most recent video or most recent run, the one that I actually recorded, I didn't do that. I actually fought her all the way up at the front because I was like, I don't know, it kind of seemed more fun to sidestep and deal with the waves up close, but I think probably for a normal group, probably would make a little bit more sense to pull her back and just give everybody like 5 to 10 seconds of reaction time instead of like 3 to 5 seconds of reaction time to deal with those waves. Once you deal with her, go to the Primal Tsunami, kill it, and then you're done. I think, you know, this used to be the hardest dungeon maybe of all time, but it got some pretty significant nerfs in Season 4, and I actually think it's a pretty decent dungeon now. I don't love it, but I think it's not too bad now. All right, let's start with the first boss, Watcher Irideus, and we'll just start with sort of some of the standard questions. Do you face the boss away from the group? Yes, you do. He has a big frontal cone that did get an animation in Season 4. It should have been in there from the Dragonflight Alpha. There was a lot of feedback saying it made no sense that this had no animation, and they finally got it in right as the expansion was coming to an end. This mechanic is really easy to deal with. You face the boss away from the group, and then when he starts to cast it, you sidestep out of it. That is all there is to the Titanic Fist. It is vitally important you step out of it. It does a massive amount of damage, and it stuns you, so you can't let that hit yourself or anybody else, but I mean, that's it. You just face him away, and then you're good. As for moving the boss around, there aren't that many movement requirements in this fight. There can be a little bit of sort of like debris that flies around, some sparks, some overloads that other people have to deal with. Those can force you to move the boss around. You know, if the boss spawns a bunch of stuff near him, you can kind of pull him away a little bit, just so that there is a bit more room for melee and frankly for range, you know, just for the whole group to be able to stand and fight the boss. But really, generally speaking, you don't have to move the boss all that much. It does help to pull the boss a little bit from his starting spot at the start of the fight, so that as people are dropping that stuff around the room, they're not dropping it right in the middle of the room where he will go during his intermissions. Okay, so the boss does have an intermission. It's phase 2. What he will do is he will, when he gets full power, he will jump to the middle of the room, walk to the middle of the room, whatever, give himself 3 charges of a shield, and then spawn 4 little sparks that are very far away. Paladin really has a huge advantage here. Blood DK does too. Basically, long-range tanks, I guess Bear, technically, with being able to moonfire these guys from long distance, is actually at a really huge advantage for this place now that I kind of think about it. And what you want to do is you want to pull those 4 guys together onto the boss and then burn them all down. When they die, they don't just immediately die. They have sort of a slow cast where they will, after a few seconds, they will pop and they will remove one of the 3 charges of the boss's shield. Now you only need to hit him with 3 of the 4 robots to break him out of his shield phase and put him back into the normal fight phase where he actually takes damage, because he is basically damage immune during that period. The problem is, of course, that these things deal damage when they explode and they silence. So if you're on like a Bear Druid, if you're on a Blood DK, you can slow them, you can Ursol's Vortex, you could use like Ring of Peace on a Monk. A lot of different stuff you can do to keep those things locked on the boss and then still get out of the circle, the explosion circle, because you don't want to get hit and you don't want to get silenced. But if it's unavoidable that you're going to get hit, it's worth it to just let the boss take the hit and actually get him out of that phase rather than being in that phase any longer. So if you have to make that choice, ultimately that would be where you'd want to pop cooldowns. I would say it's most annoying on like a Demon Hunter and a Paladin because you don't have slows, you don't have great tools for keeping those guys locked in. I guess Sigil of Chains is actually pretty good, but Paladin doesn't really have anything, and you are actually pretty heavily disrupted on both of those 2 classes by being silenced. But you know, you can deal with a 4-second silence, pick the boss back up, pulling him away from the middle of the room, face him away from the middle of the room and away from the group, and repeat until he's dead. Really not a very complicated fight. I think it's actually pretty decent now that they have the animation for his frontal cone, and that's really all there is to it. All right, now let's move on to the Gulping Goliath. This is a fight that doesn't have any sort of facing requirement. You can face the boss wherever. You still want to face it away from the group so that melee aren't getting parried. But it does have pretty significant movement requirements, and that is because throughout the fight, he will cast Overpowering Croak. This has 2 effects. One, it will cause a bunch of cave-ins, which will do like a lot of damage you want to step out of, and it'll also cause a bunch of swags to spawn, and those are the same swags that you've been fighting throughout the trash in the run up to that area. So if you're on a tank that can dispel, Druid, Paladin, Monk. If you're on a tank that can move stuff around, DK, Druid, Demon Hunter, you're at a real advantage here. You're able to pull guys together, pull them off of people, slow them, dispel the poison debuff. All of this is super important to do. The main tank mechanic of the fight is a gulp. The Gulping Goliath will gulp, and when he does, it applies 3 stacks of the Gulp Swag Toxin, and that of course does kill at 10. So what you want to do is when he casts Gulp, you just want to stand in and let him gulp you. Basically, he has to gulp somebody or he'll get hangry, and then he does a ton more damage. I did forget about that in doing this the most recent time, and so I did actually give him that 50% damage buff. And it does stack, so you definitely don't want to let him stack that up. It's a lot more dangerous to let him get hangry than it is to just get gulped on occasion. He's really not a very dangerous boss to the tank on his own. The gulp, really, you can use defensive cooldowns on it. I mean, it's Mythic Plus, it's infinite scaling content. Eventually it will become very dangerous at high enough key levels, especially on Tyrannical Week, but I would say generally speaking, it's not one of the more dangerous mechanics to deal with. It is spell damage, so you can use anti-magic shell, spell reflection, that sort of thing to mitigate it. Spell warding, I suppose. Really, you know, a pretty straightforward boss in terms of the tanking. He's really not that different from just like a training dummy in terms of the tanking, but you do want to move him around to help deal with the frogs, the swags that he's spawning, and you want to help deal with those in the same way that you had throughout the trash. Khajin the Unyielding is the 3rd boss of the dungeon, and she is by far the most complicated for tanks to deal with. She doesn't have any sort of specific facing requirements really, but she does have some pretty specific movement requirements. But once you get the hang of it, it's very simple, very easy to replicate. And so let's just go ahead and get into that now. The main mechanic of the fight is Hailstorm. She will do a massive amount of damage to all the players in the group, like very, very lethal damage to the group. But she also spawns ice boulders throughout the arena, and you are able to stand behind the ice boulders to line of sight that Hailstorm. Now there is another little complication, a little wrinkle to that, and that is that the ice boulders can be cracked, and so cracked ice boulders, if she casts Hailstorm, will also explode and do a lot of damage. So what you want to do is you want to keep the boss positioned so that it's very easy to, when she starts to cast Hailstorm, run behind the nearest ice boulder that is intact, that isn't cracked yet, and be line of sight of the boss. Now, technically, you're still able to attack the boss through that line of sight. You're still able to throw like Avenger Shield and Judgment and, you know, anything through that ice boulder. It's just that she isn't able to hit you with Hailstorm. So it's good quality of life there. You also want to be sure that you aren't standing near cracked ice boulders at the same time as well, because the ice boulders will do a pretty large explosion. They've done a good job with Season 4 of fixing a lot of the visuals in this area. It's pretty easy to tell if you will or won't be safe. You don't have to immediately stand behind an ice boulder. You don't have to be like 1 yard behind. You can be a couple yards behind it. But generally speaking, you just want to position the boss so that she is near an ice boulder, but not right on top of it, that is completely uncracked, completely safe, and also doesn't have any cracked ones near it. There's another wrinkle to this that makes things a little bit more complicated, and that is the frost cyclones that she will cast at random targets. She does cast them where people are standing though, so they do, on the one hand, they do have to sidestep them, but on the other hand, it means that they're able to position them so that they never hit the ice boulder that you're planning to go stand behind. So you can ping on the ice boulder that you want to stand behind, and then position the boss there, make sure everybody is off of that ice boulder until she starts to cast Hailstorm, and then that makes it pretty easy to deal with. There's really only 2 other mechanics. One is Glacial Surge, where she'll just cast out some rings. You just step out and then step back in. That is what spawns the ice boulders. So there's kind of always going to be some ice boulders around the boss because of that. And then the final mechanic is Frost Shock. It's just Frost Shock. It does a bunch of frost damage. You can spell block it. I think you can spell reflect it. You can AMS it. You can spell ward it. It also slows your move speed. So things like Tiger's Lust, Freedom, that's pretty much it, will help you deal with that slow, which can make it a little bit more difficult to get into position behind an ice boulder when she casts Hailstorm if you are on a slower tank. That is kind of where you would want to use your movement speed abilities. I would say generally speaking, she's really not very dangerous to the tank. None of the stuff she really does deals all that much damage other than the Frost Shock. That's basically the only thing that's really all that threatening to the tank in this fight, is just making sure that you don't like get slowed and put into a bad position, but I would say I've never really run into that as a huge problem. The final boss is Primal Tsunami, and this boss got a pretty significant change in this patch. It's only one change, but it completely redesigned, completely redefined the way that this fight works, and it did so for the better. So when the boss gets to 60%, it goes into phase 2, and that is the only time that it will do that now in Season 4. This is such a great change. I really don't hate this fight like I did before. I hated this fight before, but now I actually think it's pretty decent. So in phase 1, the boss will spawn just sort of a bunch of random globes all around the area. They sort of seem to spawn near players, but not directly on top of players, just kind of near them. And they sort of wobble around, move around a little bit. You basically just want to sidestep away from them all the time, and they'll try to kind of encroach on your space. They're very annoying, but you just stay away from them, and eventually they will explode. You want to make sure you're not in that. And that's basically all there is to the globes. This is exacerbated slightly by Squall Buffet, which is the boss's main tank mechanic. She will knock you back and then channel a focused deluge into you that deals a lot of frost damage over time. A lot of frost damage over the span of 5 seconds. So you can deal with this with spell blocks, spell reflection, shield wall, anti-magic shell. You know, all of the usual damage reduction stuff is what you would want to throw into this. Celestial Brew. I mean, this really is the main tank damager of the fight. And so what you want to do when the Squall Buffet is coming is you want to make sure that both you're not standing in an infused globe and you won't be thrown backwards into an infused globule. And those are the two things. You just want to make sure that you're not like in a straight line away from the boss, that there are no globules in that area. And then as soon as she knocks you back, you're popping your cooldowns even before the knockback as she's starting to cast it. Squall Buffet, that is. You will pop your defensive cooldowns. You will live through that burn. You'll pop all the healing that you need to live through it. And then that's basically it. There really isn't any more damage to deal to you at all for the rest of the fight. You make sure you're back in melee range before she finishes the focus deluge, or she will blast the group with Undertow. That's really all there is to phase 1. You only have to deal with phase 2 one time. You deal with it when you hit 60% health on the boss. She will grab everybody, throw them into the 4 corners of the universe, and then you have to run through a very lame gauntlet again, just like you did in the run up to the boss. It's basically just the gauntlet. There's really not anything to it other than just the gauntlet. There are, I guess, the globules from the fight, and you don't want to get hit by those. Those are pretty dangerous. Other than that, all that really changes is that once you get back to the middle arena area, there will be 4 Primalist Infusers. They are going to be channeling a spell called Infuse, and that increases the boss's damage pretty significantly. So you want to come in and silence all of them, interrupt all of them, stun them, paralysis, whatever crowd controls you can use to cancel that Infuse cast. And then you want to drag them all together. They will just basically spam cast Inundate, which deals a fair amount of damage, a fair amount of frost damage, and there's not really anything you can do to cancel that. You can stun them, Ring of Peace, Typhoon, knocks, stuns, paralysis, all the normal crowd control stuff will cancel that cast. But you can interrupt Inundate, so you can, if you're having a little bit of trouble, you can kind of go one by one around the room to deal with these guys, or maybe do with 2 of them at a time and then 2 of them at a time on the second half. But ultimately, you want to get all these guys stopped, shut down, and killed, and then proceed right back into phase 1 of the boss. And then that's it. You will just do phase 1 until the boss dies. So you just want to make sure that you're, straight line from you to the boss all the way back to the wall, that there's no globules, get Squall Buffeted, have a cooldown up for it, deal with the deluge with a cooldown and all the healing potions and cooldowns that you might need to survive. And then that's pretty much all there is to it. Primal Tsunami, not a bad fight anymore. Not a great fight, but not a terrible fight anymore. And that's how you tank Halls of Infusion. Feel free to ask questions if you have any, and good luck. Thanks for watching. Bye.